Lily had always been afraid of dolls. Even as a child, she couldn't shake the feeling that their glassy eyes followed her wherever she went, and their frozen expressions hid something sinister. So when she inherited her grandmother's collection of antique dolls, she was more than a little uneasy. But she didn't want to be rude, so she took the dolls home and put them on a shelf in her bedroom. And for a while, nothing happened. The dolls just sat there, silent and still. But then Lily started to notice things. Sometimes when she entered the room, she would catch the dolls out of the corner of her eye, and she could swear that they had moved. And then there was the whispering. It was always just out of earshot, but Lily could hear it, the faint sound of voices that seemed to come from the dolls themselves. At first, Lily tried to ignore it. She told herself that it was just her imagination, that she was being silly. But the whispers grew louder, and the dolls seemed to move more often. And then there was the incident with the porcelain doll. Lily had gone to bed one night, leaving the dolls on their shelf. But in the middle of the night, she was awoken by a loud crashing sound. When she turned on the light, she saw that the porcelain doll had fallen off the shelf and shattered on the floor. But that wasn't the worst part. Lily could swear that the doll's expression had changed. Instead of its usual serene smile, it now looked angry, almost as if it was glaring at her. From then on, Lily was convinced that the dolls were alive. She started to have nightmares about them, dreams where they would come to life and chase her, their glassy eyes fixed on her as she ran through dark, winding hallways. And then one day, she woke up to find that the dolls were gone. She searched the house frantically, tearing through drawers and closets, but the dolls were nowhere to be found. Lily was convinced that she had finally lost her mind. But then, just as suddenly as they had disappeared, they reappeared. Lily was sitting on the couch watching TV when she heard a soft rustling sound. She turned her head and saw the dolls, all of them, arranged in a circle on the coffee table. But they were different. They had changed. Their glassy eyes were now filled with a malevolent light, and their expressions were twisted into grotesque grins. And then they spoke, their voices low and menacing, promising Lily an eternity of pain and terror. Lily tried to run, but the dolls were too fast. They swarmed around her, their tiny hands gripping her arms and legs, pulling her down to the floor. And then they started to change her. Her skin grew hard and smooth, her eyes turned into glass, and she became one of them. And so it was that Lily was taken, dragged down into the darkness by the dolls that had once adorned her room. No one ever found her, and the dolls remained, a reminder of the horror that had claimed her soul. But sometimes, when the moon is full and the night is still, you can hear the faint sound of whispers coming from the room where Lily used to sleep. Years passed, and Lily's old house was eventually bought by a young couple, Amelia and Jacob. They were delighted with their new home, but as they began to unpack their belongings, Amelia couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. One day, while exploring the house, Amelia stumbled upon the old room where Lily's dolls had once been kept. She shuddered as she gazed upon the empty shelf, feeling a sense of unease that she couldn't quite explain. As she turned to leave, something caught her eye. A small, intricately carved wooden box, tucked away in the corner of the room. Amelia hesitated for a moment before reaching for the box. As she lifted the lid, she gasped in horror at what she found inside. It was filled with tiny porcelain dolls, each one exquisitely crafted, with glassy eyes that seemed to follow her every move. But that wasn't the worst part. As she looked closer, Amelia realized that each doll had a name etched into its base, and one of those names was Lily. Suddenly, Amelia was filled with an overwhelming sense of dread. She knew that she had to get rid of the dolls, to banish them from her home before they could do any harm. But as she turned to leave the room, she heard a soft rustling sound, and she froze. Slowly, she turned back to face the shelf, and her heart sank as she saw the dolls had moved. They were no longer in the box. They were on the shelf, arranged in a circle just as Lily had described. And as Amelia watched in horror, their expressions twisted into grotesque grins, and they started to whisper, promising her an eternity of pain and terror. Amelia tried to run, but it was too late. The dolls had already claimed her, and she was never seen again. And so it was that another victim was claimed by the cursed dolls of Lily's grandmother. To this day the dolls remain, waiting for their next victim, their glassy eyes glittering in the dark. Despite the disappearance of Amelia, the new owners of the house, Jacob, refused to believe in the existence of the cursed dolls. He thought that Amelia's disappearance was just a coincidence and she probably left him. But Jacob's denial didn't last long. One night he was awakened by the sound of whispers coming from the direction of the old room. He got out of bed and walked towards the room, and the whispers grew louder and more sinister as he approached. As he entered the room, Jacob felt an icy chill run down his spine. The dolls had moved again, and this time they were arranged in a perfect circle around the old wooden box. Jacob felt the hair on the back of his neck stand up, and his heart was pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. He tried to back away slowly, but the dolls seemed to be closing in on him, their glassy eyes staring hungrily. Suddenly, Jacob felt something grab his ankle, and he fell to the ground with a thud. Looking down, he saw that one of the dolls had come to life and was pulling him towards the circle. Jacob screamed and kicked, but it was no use. The doll's grip was too strong, and it dragged him towards the circle. As he was pulled closer, Jacob could hear the doll's whispers growing louder, and he knew that he was going to be their next victim. But just as the dolls were about to claim him, the first rays of dawn broke through the window, and the dolls fell silent. Jacob felt the doll's grip loosen, and he scrambled to his feet, running out of the room as fast as he could. From that day on, Jacob refused to enter the old room, but he could still hear the whispers at night, and sometimes he would catch a glimpse of the dolls moving out of the corner of his eye. Years later, when Jacob finally moved out of the house, he left the dolls behind, hoping that they would remain trapped in the old room forever. But some say that to this day, the dolls still whisper in the darkness, waiting for their next victim. The new owners of the house were a young couple, Jack and Sarah. They had just gotten married and were excited to start their life together in their new home. Jack was a skeptic and didn't believe in ghosts or curses, but Sarah had a feeling that something wasn't quite right about the old house. On their first night in the house, Jack and Sarah were lying in bed, talking about their plans for the future. Suddenly, they heard a sound coming from the old room. It was a faint whispering, but it was enough to make Sarah's blood run cold. "Did you hear that?" she asked Jack. "Hear what?" he replied, not even looking up from his phone. "The whispering," Sarah said, her voice trembling. "It's coming from the old room." Jack sighed and got up from the bed. "I'll go check it out," he said. As he entered the old room, Jack felt a sense of unease wash over him. The dolls were still there, arranged in a circle around the wooden box, just as they had been when Amelia disappeared. But this time, something was different. The doll's eyes seemed to be following him, and he could feel their malevolent energy. Suddenly, Jack heard a faint voice whispering in his ear. He turned around, but no one was there. Then he heard it again, louder this time. "Get out," the voice said. Jack ran out of the room, his heart pounding in his chest. He told Sarah what had happened, but she didn't believe him. "It was just your imagination," she said, trying to calm him down. But as the days went on, strange things started to happen in the house. Objects would move on their own, and sometimes they would hear footsteps coming from the old room, even though no one was there. One night, Sarah woke up to find one of the dolls sitting at the foot of their bed, its glassy eyes staring at her. She screamed, and Jack turned on the light. But when they looked again, the doll was gone. The final straw came when they woke up one morning to find that all of their possessions had been rearranged in the house. Sarah was convinced that they needed to leave, but Jack was stubborn and refused to believe in the supernatural. That night, as they were sleeping, Sarah was awakened by the sound of whispers coming from the old room. She shook Jack awake, and they both listened in horror as the dolls whispered in unison. "Leave this house," they said, "or suffer the same fate as those who came before you." Jack finally realized the gravity of the situation and agreed to leave the house. They packed their things and never looked back. Years later, the house remained empty, and the dolls were still there, waiting for their next victims. Some say that on quiet nights, you can still hear their whispers coming from the old room, warning anyone who enters the house of the curse that lies within. Despite Jack and Sarah's departure from the house, they were unable to escape the memories of their haunting experience. The dolls and their whispers continued to haunt them in their dreams, and they often woke up in cold sweats, reliving their terrifying encounter. Eventually, their marriage started to suffer under the weight of their shared trauma. They argued more often, and both became distant and withdrawn. In the end, they decided to divorce and move on with their lives separately. However, the curse of the old house did not end with Jack and Sarah's departure. The property remained empty for years, as potential buyers would always be deterred by the rumors of its dark past. One day, a new family moved in, hoping to start a new life in a big old house with plenty of character. They had heard the rumors about the dolls and the whispers, but they dismissed them as silly superstitions. But as soon as they moved in, strange things began to happen. Doors would slam shut on their own, and objects would disappear, only to turn up in strange places. The family tried to ignore it, but the unease grew with every passing day. One night, the father of the family decided to investigate the old room, hoping to put an end to the strange occurrences. But as he opened the door, he was met with the same sight that had terrorized Jack and Sarah all those years ago. The dolls were still there, their glassy eyes staring back at him. And as he looked closer, he saw that one of the dolls had been moved from its original position, as if it was inviting him to open the wooden box. Without thinking, the father reached out to open the box. But as soon as he touched it, a chill ran down his spine, and he heard a whisper in his ear. "Leave this house," the dolls said, "or suffer the same fate as those who came before you." The father ran out of the room, never looking back. He gathered his family and fled the house, never to return again. Years went by, and the old house remained empty, a silent monument to the curse that still lingered within its walls. And though the dolls and the whispers remained, warning anyone who dared enter, some say that on quiet nights you can hear a new sound emanating from the house. A faint scratching, as if someone or something was trying to claw its way out. Despite the ominous scratching sound coming from the old house, the property remained abandoned for many years. However, it soon caught the attention of a group of teenagers who were looking for a place to hang out and explore. Despite the warnings of their parents and the rumors surrounding the house, the teenagers decided to sneak inside one night. They laughed and joked as they made their way through the old rooms, dismissing the strange sounds and shadows as their own imagination. But as they entered the room where the dolls were kept, their laughter turned to terror. The dolls were still there, but they were different. Their once lifeless eyes now glowed with an eerie red light, and their smiles had twisted into grotesque grins. The teenagers tried to run, but the door slammed shut behind them, trapping them inside with the demonic dolls. The whispers that had once been faint now grew louder, and the teenagers realized with horror that the dolls were speaking directly to them. "You should never have come here," the dolls said in unison, their voices deep and otherworldly. "Now you will pay the price for your curiosity." The dolls attacked the teenagers with their sharp limbs, their laughter echoing through the house as they tore them apart. Their screams filled the night air, but no one heard them, for the curse of the old house had silenced all who entered. The next day, the police found the remains of the teenagers scattered throughout the old house. But when they tried to enter the room where the dolls were kept, they found that the door was stuck fast, as if it had been sealed shut from the inside. And though the old house was eventually demolished, the dolls and their curse still lingered, waiting for new victims to fall prey to their evil.